CuriosityStream is the world's only streaming service dedicated to documentaries, featuring tons of amazing titles you won't find on any other streaming platforms. Get CuriosityStream for 25% off, which is just $15 a year, by clicking the link right underneath this video. I want to start today by talking about Texas. Texas is a state that for so many years we keep hearing, this is the year that Texas might change. This is the year that, due to demographic shifts, it might no longer be a red state. This is the year a Democratic candidate might win the presidential election in 2020. It was theorized that maybe Joe Biden could. It didn't ultimately happen. And we've been talking more and more about Texas, including yesterday on the bonus show, which I hope, the bonus show at this point, award-winning and world famous. If you're not getting the bonus show, what are we doing, folks? Yesterday on the bonus show, I told you, I'm very happy to hear that Democrat Beto O'Rourke is looking very strongly, as the kids say these days, at running for governor in Texas in 2022 against the incumbent Republican governor, Greg Abbott. Greg Abbott is horrible. Really just a horrible person, and has been an absolute disaster for Texas. And I'm just as thrilled to tell you today that Greg Abbott's approval rating is continuing to collapse and crater and decline, as it should, based on what he has done as governor of Texas. And this could shape up to be a major win for Democrats in next year's midterm. So let's quantify this first, and then we'll talk more qualitatively. What are the numbers in Texas? Well, Greg Abbott's job approval is now down to just 45%. This is a Republican governor in a Republican state that increasingly has purple elements to it, for sure. 54% of Texans say the state is going in the wrong direction. Before COVID, Abbott's approval was 59%. 59. It's now 45%. That's a decline of 14 percentage points. Look at how much of a disaster Abbott's ideology and leadership have been for Texas. On COVID, he's been on the side of the virus, quite frankly. He's been on the side of opposing ever really closing much of anything. His lieutenant governor, Dan Patrick, famously went on TV in was it May of 2020? It was very early, June maybe, and said, we've got to keep things open, folks. And grandma's willing to sacrifice herself for the good of the economy, by which he meant, of course, the stock market. The Abbott administration has been on the side of opposing masking requirements and making them more difficult to pass. The Abbott administration has been opposing vaccination requirements and or making them more difficult to put in place. And Texas deaths are spiking pretty badly. This has been one of the worst run states on COVID, period, under the vague and almost meaningless and satirical at this point heading of freedom and liberty. So that's COVID, total disaster. But then look at energy. They love to brag in Texas, Republicans do, about we've got this big, bad, independent electrical grid. We're not linked to any other states, including any blue states. We do our own thing. We do our own generation and blah, but we don't need anybody else. And thanks to that very system, last winter, Texas experienced major blackouts. They tried to blame it on frozen wind farms. And of course, we debunked that. Total and complete humiliation for their liberty-minded electrical grid. This past summer, due to the heat, this summer, what I mean is a couple months ago, Texas was going in and just adjusting people's thermostats to try to reduce electrical demand. Now, to be clear, the customers that had that happen, they did opt into that. But it's not common that it actually has to be done by the electrical company. Just one disaster after another. And as I said yesterday, I'm very excited about Beto O'Rourke challenging Greg Abbott. This is building my belief even more that the 2022 midterms could be some of not only the most interesting from an observer standpoint, but some of the most consequential midterms in a long time. Abbott's approval rating should be collapsing. He and his administration have caused unnecessary suffering and needless death. And now in 14 months, Greg Abbott could be held accountable for it. There are going to be important races in these midterms at every single level. Now, of course, every member of the House is up for re-election, as they are every 2 years. 1/3 of senators, maybe in your state, 1/3 are up for re-election. Many governors are up for re-election, or we may even have open seats as far as governors are concerned. And then, of course, state Senate, state House. They're going to keep trying to take over school boards. We're going to talk about school boards a little bit later on in today's program. Really a ton that is going to be on the ballot. And in a sense, it's a referendum on Trumpism as well. And we've talked about why. If the Trump acolytes all get reelected, or most of them do, or Trump endorsed candidates win, it will further the grasp that Trumpism has on the Republican Party. It will likely encourage Trump to run in 2024. If the opposite happens, it may dissuade Trump from running in 24. It may push the Republican Party away from Trumpism. So we will see. Now, to go back to Greg Abbott momentarily, he's been a huge disaster. He's failed everywhere. And yet he and they, Republicans, may still run in Texas on Democrats are going to take your guns if they win. And that actually could be enough to win in Texas. They could do that, and they could end up winning if we don't take this seriously. But we're going to have plenty of time to talk about Beto O'Rourke's candidacy as we get closer to the midterms. I keep telling people on the bonus show, in my discussions with YouTube, with our YouTube rep, it seems more and more like the expectation is the midterm build is going to start earlier, often doesn't start until late April into May, fully expecting by late February, mid-March, at the latest late March, these midterms are going to get going. The Texas race with Beto O'Rourke, believed to be set to challenge Greg Abbott, going to be a big part of that, and we're going to be covering that as well. We also will be covering what is this building and continued sort of civil war within the Republican Party, and that's what I want to talk about next. There is a new report that former President Donald Trump is now actively working to remove Mitch McConnell as the leader of Republicans in the Senate. Now, what's funny is Trump's work ethic, we learned with him as president, is a disaster. So the fact that Trump is believed to be actively working towards something may not really mean very much. But regardless, let's talk about what is being reported at this point in time. Business Insider reporting, Trump is actively working to oust McConnell as the Senate Republican leader. Now, remember, because Republicans don't currently control the Senate, Mitch is the Senate minority leader rather than the Senate majority leader. Okay, just a point of clarification to ensure that we have clarity this evening. Former President Donald Trump has spoken recently with Republican senators and political allies about ousting Minority Leader Mitch McConnell from leadership, and is gauging whether there's any interest among lawmakers for a possible challenge, according to the Wall Street Journal. There appears to be little support for such a drastic move, according to the report, but Trump's actions could potentially morph into a larger issue for the party, especially as the Kentucky Republican hopes to regain the Senate majority in the 2022 midterm elections, and the former president continues to float a potential 2024 bid. So you have these two factors coming together. You have Republicans want the Senate back in 22, and there doesn't seem to be much of an appetite from the base to remove Mitch McConnell as the leader. On the other hand, Donald Trump is thinking about a run in 2024. Mitch McConnell, at least over the last 9 months, has not been a particularly big friend to Trumpism. And you have this conflict. Which way are they more likely to go? While Trump and McConnell worked together to fill scores of federal court vacancies and with conservative jurists, along with passing the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and other Republican priorities, Trump's intransigence in accepting his election loss to now President Joe Biden and the January 6th Capitol riot deeply strained the relationship between the two men. That's sort of an understatement in the sense that at every rally Trump has done recently, which we've covered just about all of them, he actively goes after Mitch McConnell and so-called rhinos and talks about how bad actually Mitch McConnell has been. Rarely, let me put it a different way. I don't want to say rarely. I don't remember even a single instance of a current or former Republican president being this hostile to a Republican Senate leader. It's not even that it's rare. I just don't remember any other instance. I'm glad to be reminded of one if you're aware of one. The article goes on to say, after Trump's second Senate impeachment trial for incitement of insurrection for his role in the riot, McConnell declined to find the president guilty, but sharply rebuked him on the Senate floor. Later, McConnell said he would support Trump in 24 if he were the nominee, but Trump has not forgiven the minority leader for his speech. Trump has continued to needle McConnell in the press. He recently took the minority leader to task for backing the $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure package that passed the Senate last month, calling the legislation a disgrace. Trump saying, quote, if Mitch McConnell was smart, which we've seen no evidence of, he would use the debt ceiling card to negotiate a good infrastructure package. We'll actually talk a little bit about that on the bonus show today as well. So let's see how the base reacts. I welcome the self-cannibalization, or I guess you don't have to say, it's just the cannibalization. Self-cannibalization. Well, you guys know what I mean. I welcome the Republican Party eating itself. So far, the base, which supports Trump, has certainly cheered on Trump's attacks on other Republicans, at least as at rallies. But a lot of those rally goers are confused by what's going on. They don't know, left is down, whatever. They don't know what's going on. They would probably cheer whatever Trump says. It's not clear they actually are understanding what they're doing. But we could see a change in the interest of the Trumpian wing of the Republican Party in supporting Trump's attacks on the establishment Republican Party, in particular, if Trumpism doesn't do well in the midterms. In terms of ousting McConnell was just reelected in 2020. He's there until 2026. I have a difficult time thinking that Republicans will really turn on him as long as something completely insane isn't found in McConnell's closet. I actually am hoping Trump succeeds at creating chaos and hostility against McConnell in a more serious way among the Republican establishment. I just don't think he can do that much. But anything he's able to do is likely to fracture the Republican Party, and that's a really great thing. It would be terrible for Republicans in the upcoming midterms to be fighting each other as much as they're fighting Democrats. It would be great for Democrats for Republicans to be fighting each other. It's just really not clear at this point to what degree Donald Trump can get Republicans angry against other Republicans in a way that will actually have electoral consequences. I just don't know the answer to that. Now, this Saturday, Trump is doing a rally in, I believe it's in Georgia. My plan is to cover it, technology permitting and schedule permitting. We will see to what degree Trump attacks Republicans. And the location of this rally in Georgia is actually very important. Donald Trump, we talked yesterday, just released this letter written to officials in Georgia, all Republicans, remember, demanding that the rightful winner of the 2020 presidential election in Georgia be announced. Trump means himself by saying that. And there's a very good chance, in particular with Saturday's rally being in Georgia, that Trump will go really hard against the Republicans in that state. It'll be interesting, particularly in light of the Mitch McConnell plan that Trump is developing. And, plan may be a bit of a generous term. It'll be interesting to see to what degree the crowd cheers Trump's attacks on Republicans. So that's Saturday. In the meantime, tell me this. Find me on Twitter at @dpacman and tell me this. Do you really think Republicans might turn on Mitch McConnell? I have a very difficult time seeing it. Let me know. One of our sponsors is CuriosityStream, the only subscription streaming service just for documentaries. My girlfriend and I have been using the CuriosityStream platform at home nonstop. I can tell you from personal experience, much better documentary selection than Netflix, Hulu, or Amazon. On CuriosityStream, I'm always finding documentaries by the world's best filmmakers, stuff you can't find on other streaming services. Last month, they added a ton of awesome new titles to the library. I just finished watching Becoming Martian, about the future of the human species and its possible path through Mars. But there's documentaries on every topic imaginable: science, nature, history, politics. If you love documentaries the way I do, you are not going to find a better source of brand new, award-winning docs anywhere else. CuriosityStream is giving my audience 25% off, which means you can subscribe for just $15 a year. Not a big price tag for the hours and hours of enjoyment I know you will get from CuriosityStream. Just go to curiositystream.com/Pacman25. The link is underneath this video. I want to talk about a story in which a daughter whose dad recently died of COVID went on CNN and at least partially blamed Fox News propagandist Tucker Carlson for his role in her dad's COVID death, her dad falling for misinformation, including the misinformation he consumed from Tucker Carlson. And there's sort of like three stories here. One is, to what degree, if any, does Tucker or do other media people bear responsibility for these deaths? Number two, is there something that feels a little bit off or exploitative about these types of interviews with the surviving family members? And then number three, something a bunch of people emailed me about, which is, could there ever be like a legal responsibility for someone in the media as a result of people that die thanks to having followed or fallen for that misinformation? So to set the stage, just briefly, this article outlines what happened here. Daughter blames Tucker Carlson's misinformation for playing a role in dad's COVID death. The 45-year-old father of two had no underlying health conditions. A Washington woman whose father died of the coronavirus said he was hesitant to get vaccinated because of misinformation he heard in right-wing media, and specifically cited Fox News host Tucker Carlson. Katie Lane said her father, 45-year-old Boeing designer Patrick Lane, wasn't on the far right politically. We'll get to that. When asked what specifically made her father refuse the shot, the 20-year-old cited Tucker Carlson. Katie said her father was waiting for full FDA approval before getting the shot. And this is interesting, but by the time that happened, he was already sick. One of his last comments was he wished he had been vaccinated. And there have been many, many people saying, I'm just waiting for that full approval. That full approval has come and gone. And many still not interested in getting vaccinated. For Patrick Lane, it was too late. He was already sick. He couldn't get vaccinated. Let's listen to some of the interview and then discuss.
Why was he so hesitant to get vaccinated, Katie?
There's multiple reasons, I think. One of which was some of the media that he ingested. He wasn't by any means far right. He was right in the middle, and he consumed media from both sides. And just some of the misinformation on one of those sides made him hesitant. So he was going to wait for FDA approval, but by the time that Pfizer had been approved, it was already too late.
Pfizer got the full FDA approval and your father was already sick. Evan, talk to me about your final goodbye to your father. Did you have a chance to spend any real time with him?
So this is the part that to me is starting to feel a little bit exploitative. I've seen a bunch of interviews like this, and there's a disaster porn aspect to it. I'm not feeling fully comfortable with it, including the desire to figure out what were the last words. And you'll see that at a point soon, John Berman actually asks, were those his last words? And I think it's the daughter says, well, those were his last words to my stepmom or something like that. But there's something that's starting to almost get like salacious about these interviews. And I don't know that I'm loving it.
Not really. I was already staying at another house and he was just coming by to pick something up, and he didn't even want to get too close because he was too worried about getting me sick, so I didn't even get to hug him before he left, and then before I knew, he was gone.
You guys are vaccinated now, Evan. You know, what was the message ultimately that your father wanted to spread about vaccines?
He wasn't anti-vaccine, he was just hesitant, and now that Pfizer's been FDA approved, I don't think he would have anything wrong with telling people to get that vaccine.
His final words to my stepmom on a FaceTime call was that he wished that he was vaccinated.
Those were his final words?
To my stepmom, the last call that she had with him, he said that he wished that he was vaccinated.
So, like, what are people with me? Does this feel somewhat exploitative? Like, I mean, if the point is just to convince people to get vaccinated, maybe this is effective. I just don't know. I'm not sure.
And Katie, you said from one media source in particular, he was getting information that led him to be hesitant on vaccines. Who? I mean, who was he listening to?
He watched some Tucker Carlson videos on YouTube, and some of those videos involved some misinformation about vaccines, and I believe that played a role.
Evan, what do you want people to remember?
So where to even start, right? I got an email asking more or less about legal liability. Like, if you can demonstrate that this guy wasn't vaccinated because of Tucker Carlson, could there be legal liability? No, absolutely not. I mean, even if in theory, so let's see, there's multiple reasons as to why not. First of all, you'd have to demonstrate that, number one, were it not only for Tucker Carlson, this man would have been vaccinated. The vaccine is not 100% effective at preventing death. It's very effective at preventing death, but not 100%. So you could not even prove that had this particular person been vaccinated, they would not have died. But moreover, Fox News has already argued legally that Tucker Carlson's show is entertainment, that no reasonable person would interpret what Tucker says as fact, that it's performative, that it's entertainment. And also, there are so many instances and so many media outlets where disinformation is being spread, whether it's called entertainment or news. There's not going to be, it would never succeed to try to hold Tucker Carlson legally liable for this. So I guess the questions are, given that it's undeniable that the misinformation does play a role in people not getting vaccinated, what could be done? What should be done from a legal standpoint, if anything? Or is it just a matter of this is just speech, and certainly platforms can regulate it if they want? Facebook can say, we will police disinformation content about vaccines, but that's not a legal issue. It's not illegal. It's just Facebook says, well, we're not going to allow it on our platform, which is their right to do. And then lastly, how are people feeling about these types of segments in general? The what were the last words and this type of thing? Is there an exploitative aspect to it? Is there an exploitative aspect that's acceptable if the goal is to convince people to get vaccinated? Let me know what you think. This next story is part tragedy and it's part comedy of errors. Another Republican official has sadly died of COVID. That's the tragic part. When people die, it's a tragedy. This time it's the bookkeeper for the Hillsborough County, Florida Republican Party. Okay, his name was Greg Prentice. He was 61 years old. He was the accountant for the Hillsborough County GOP. He built and maintained the local Republican Party's campaign finance software last year. He was the guy filing the monthly reports to the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission. He also was a big anti-vax guy. Greg Prentice fear-mongered against vaccines, fear-mongered against masks, was totally against other pandemic health guidelines. He attacked Dr. Fauci, posting on Facebook that America needs to, quote, end Faucism. Well, he died. And now nobody else has the login or the password for the accounts needed to file these reports with the FEC or any idea how to use them. The Hillsborough County Republican Party is now in quite a pickle, I guess we would say. They put out a statement saying, quote, as a political party committee, we file our FEC reports on a monthly basis. For several years, we've been submitting the reports electronically, and for over a year, we've done this with software developed by one of our members, Greg Prentice. Greg's software converted data from QuickBooks to supply the information needed by the FEC. Unfortunately, Greg passed away suddenly from COVID on September 11th. Greg did not share the software and instructions for its use with our officers. We will have to enter August data manually, and according to the information we've received from our FEC analysts, we may likely have to re-enter the data from our first 7 months of 2021. We will be struggling to get all of this entered in the proper format by our deadline on September 20, but we will try to do so with our best effort. This is another bizarre example of COVID crippling the Republican Party, but quite different than what we've become used to. Now, as another little note, Greg Prentice's death has also opened up a whole deluge of conspiracy theories from other local Republican Party officials. One who called COVID a, quote, medically engineered virus and suggested without any evidence that Greg Prentice's death was actually a result of wrongdoing by the hospital where he was being treated rather than by COVID itself. In other words, guy rants against vaccines and against masks for over a year, catches COVID and ends up in the hospital, dies. And the conspiracy is it wasn't COVID that killed him. It was it was malpractice, essentially, by the doctors, not COVID itself. And this is, again, as we've talked about before, this is indefeasible. The classic example is I come to you and I say, sir, there's an invisible elephant in the room with us right now. And you say, okay, well, it might be invisible, but it still has weight. So let's put a scale down and we'll know if there's an invisible elephant here because the elephant will step on the scale. And then I say, well, no, not only is it invisible, it's also a weightless invisible elephant. And I say, okay, all right, fair. You know what? It must still move the air around it. So let's put down a bunch of baby powder. And as the invisible weightless elephant moves around, because it has volume, it will still displace the baby powder. And then I say, no, it's invisible and weightless and it has no volume and it doesn't impact. At a certain point, you can't defeat any argument that is based on this kind of framework. He didn't really die of COVID. He died from being mistreated at the hospital. What we'd really love to be able to see is these people lose because they don't offer policy that makes any sense and because they run terrible elections, not because they're unvaccinated and dying of COVID. That would be my preference. And imagine, by the way, if the situation was reversed and you had Democrats saying, hey, you know what? We had one person with the password to the accounting software. They died. So now we're going to be late on filing with the FEC. The MAGA people or the Q people or whoever, they would be saying the Clintons had him killed. The Clintons had him killed because the FEC documents were going to expose that they were fill in the blanks, absconding with money, embezzling, whatever the case may be. Crazy situation. You got to share that username and password. We'll have more coverage of this and similar stories on our Instagram. Find us on Instagram at David Pakman Show. Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time and plenty of other awesome membership perks. Go to joinpakman.com and use the coupon code BETTER21 for a huge discount. Joinpakman.com. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Spencer Headworth, who's assistant professor of sociology at Purdue University, affiliated scholar of the American Bar Foundation, and also author of the book Policing Welfare, Punitive Adversarialism in Public Assistance. It's great to have you on. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
So, I think maybe to get us into this conversation, oftentimes in popular culture, people will point to the Ronald Reagan stories about welfare queens as really raising the level of suspicion around welfare programs and so-called free riders. How far back can we trace that suspicion about people receiving benefits they don't really deserve and this type of idea?
Sure. So it goes back about as far as organized poverty relief programs go back. So you can look at English poor law in the 15th century, in the 1400s in England, and in those very early versions of assistance programs, there were provisions for, inspectors basically to check up on people and see if they were drinking or gambling with the assistance that they were getting from the state. And in the United States, again, it tracks back to the kind of earliest versions of public assistance programs that were out there. And in the 20th century, when we get food stamps, the predecessor to SNAP, the kind of earliest food stamp provisions included checking on people to see if they were violating rules. And it's a long history that's intertwined. There really is almost no historical period where welfare programs did not include some kind of suspicion, checking, evaluation types of mechanisms. That said, it certainly does ramp up in the Reagan administration in the United States as a politically and popularly salient issue, and a period when we get several key legal changes.
So if a certain program has requirements in order to qualify, it seems intuitive that you would have some mechanism for policing that and ensuring that the people that are getting the benefits actually qualify. Now, in some theoretical sense, if one eliminated all of this bureaucracy for policing, there's some cost to that bureaucracy. In theory, it might actually, in the net, cost less not to worry about the so-called free riders and eliminate the cost of the bureaucracy. Has that been studied with any particular programs?
So economists have looked into this at least to some degree with regard to like a UBI type of system, right? A universal basic income. The idea of taking a means-tested program like SNAP, like TANF that we have now, and completely eliminating the expenses associated with the policing mechanisms, it's really hard to tell. You can do some things, some very basic, back of the napkin, how much are we recovering per investigation type of math, but that does not take account for whatever deterrent effect the existence of fraud investigation has, the kind of broader symbolic components of the system that have an influence on people's behavior, which there is some influence, but it's really hard to determine how. It's the kind of counterfactual where we don't have these programs, we don't have data really, right? So it's tough to say. And for the book, the primary data are interviews with people who work in fraud investigation, investigators and data analysts and managers of these units and so forth. And they, perhaps unsurprisingly, given it's their job, but they think that deterrent effect, which is hard to measure, is really substantial. So it's hard to say.
In policing by law enforcement, we have many examples of how a law or a statute can just kind of be written agnostically on paper, but can be applied in discriminatory ways or selectively. Can you talk a little bit about, when it comes to policing of welfare programs, does the same thing apply? And if so, how do we see kind of the discriminative application of some of these programs, or of policing mechanisms, rather?
So there are ways that these programs, some of the ways that these programs function do have some implications, I think, for inequities in who's investigated, who's potentially charged with welfare fraud, who has these charges substantiated against them. I will note that nearly all of the people that I spoke to were adamant that they do not discriminate on the basis of race, that they have no feelings about that one way or the other. One of the basic facts here is that they mostly investigate women because women are disproportionately participants in the program, right? So there's that difference.
I guess the question there would be, are they investigated at a greater rate than their level of participation?
They don't keep statistics on the characteristics of the people that they investigate, or at least they told me that they don't. So I can't say that for sure. I can say that, for example, being a person with children as opposed to a person without children has at least some effect on increasing your likelihood of becoming the subject of a serious investigation. So one of the basic mechanisms here is they're trying to figure out which cases are most promising. So they have more potential investigations than they can pursue, so they choose which ones to go after.
Right.
And one of the main things that they're looking for is a higher dollar value. So if you're the head of a household with children, you're probably getting a higher dollar value in benefits than if you're not. So that's an example of just kind of a mathematical risk factor. Another thing that's going on here is the cases that are most promising to investigate are cases with more evidentiary availability, right? So if you can get more information about a person, you're more likely to spend more time on that investigation, to make it a priority, because you can get more access to evidence that you can use to substantiate your charges. So that means if you are, quote unquote, on paper in various ways already with government agencies, whether that be criminal justice agencies, agencies of the welfare state, whatever it is, if you have kids in school, all of these are potential sources of information that welfare fraud investigators can draw upon to figure out how much money you make, who lives in your house, these kinds of things. So being more recorded by the state has this sort of implication of also making you potentially more interesting as someone to investigate, because this evidence is out there in ways it might not be for someone who's less recorded with the state.
When we talk about fraud, people, oftentimes the application processes for these programs are not particularly simple. And there's, it seems to me, at least in intent, a big difference between fraud and errors made during the application process. Can you talk a little bit about whether mistakes and errors or information that has since changed are considered fraud under this general umbrella?
First I would flag the person whose research is probably the best on this is Karen Gustafson, who wrote a book called Cheating Welfare. That's one of the inspirations for this book that came out a few years ago with NYU Press. And, she focuses on clients. And so she delves pretty deeply into this question of intent and the construction of intent, and when is a mistake just a mistake. One thing that I can say for sure from my evidence and comparing it with previous work like Karen's that looks at the client side is that the investigators are much more likely to see things as intentional and present them as intentional than our clients, right? And that is in part due to the structural factors pertaining here. So they are, the individual investigators and the broader units of which they are parts, are incentivized to get intentional program violation charges, intentional fraud charges. Those are the sort of most rewarding for them professionally. They also garner financial rewards for the state from the federal government when you can substantiate these types of charges. So there are things that I think are borderline that get constructed as intentional. And the broad the sort of baseline understanding here is that if you provide a piece of information to the agency and sign your application form saying that everything that you've sworn to here is accurate and up to date, and then later they find evidence, whether it's from the Department of Labor, the Department of Motor Vehicles, or a privately maintained database of some kind, wherever they get it, if they find that evidence that contradicts whatever you put on your signed statement, that is generally considered probative proof of intentional fraud.
And what is the process for adjudicating something like that?
So in 1976, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Goldberg versus Kelly that welfare benefits are a form of property, and that therefore participants in the program are entitled to some version of due process before benefits can be terminated. So the way that works when you're accused of an intentional program violation is in a setting that's called an administrative hearing, administrative disqualification hearing, perhaps, that is overseen by an administrative hearing officer that is the equivalent of a judge. And that's where the client gets an opportunity to come in and potentially argue against whatever allegations are being made, present their own evidence if they have evidence that contradicts the evidence that the welfare fraud investigator gathered. And then the administrative hearing officer makes a determination of whether the state has met their burden of proof in establishing, clear and convincing evidence of an intentional program violation. So that's one of the things that welfare fraud investigators have to learn how to navigate and negotiate is how to work in these settings, getting to know the particular hearing officers and what kind of standards they have. And it's, one sort of advantage that a fraud investigator has over a client is they're more familiar with the setting, right? They potentially know the hearing officer, they've been there before, they know, Ms. Jones likes this kind of evidence. Mr. Smith doesn't like this kind of evidence.
Right.
You know, they're more inclined to do this or that. So that's the setting where these things are adjudicated. And one of the things that fraud investigators learn is how to navigate and negotiate in those spaces.
One of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about is just other systems in other countries that may overall be more efficient. And one could argue, you know, part of it depends on your perspective, but one could argue that there's lots of inefficiencies in these systems. One could argue that the means testing itself is an inefficiency. One could argue that the methods for policing are inefficient. There's a lot of different approaches to that. But in terms of benefits and cost efficiency overall, what should we be aspiring to? What sort of examples in other countries are particularly well run?
So I'm not an expert on international welfare states, but I will say that there is, I think, a very strong case to be made for a universal basic income type of system where you remove all of this administrative overhead, all of this bureaucratic red tape, and create a much smoother flowing system without all of these hurdles and barriers and all of the associated costs and expenses. And so people who are experts in this area, at least to the extent that I've read them, generally associate a system like ours that focuses on means testing with the almost inherent or inescapable circumstance of rule enforcement being a big part of it, right? And this process of determining who's in and who's out being a costly endeavor. So in a system where you can eliminate those administrative expenses, you're saving that money. So I think that there's definitely a good case to be made for more of a universal system. I mean, something like we have now in the United States, but just based on age, right? For Social Security benefits and Medicare benefits.
In such a system, both when it comes to UBI and so-called free college, there's the criticism that you're also giving stuff to the very, very rich. Now, the very, very rich statistically are a small percentage of the economy, but by sort of definition. Is that something we should worry about or not?
Well, I mean, I won't tell people what to worry about or what to not worry about, but there is an inherent logic to a means-tested system, right? It makes a lot of sense, I think, in an abstract world or just, on paper, that people in need should be the people that receive things. But it just gets very complicated when you come down to the process, okay, what is need, right? How are we going to calculate that? That's contentious in and of itself. And then, these administrative costs, I think, they're often not visible publicly, right, or not really prominent in the popular imagination. And again, there is this inherent logic to targeting aid to needy people, but where the rubber hits the road, it's a lot more complicated than just see who's needy, give it to them, don't give it to someone who's quote unquote not.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. The book is Policing Welfare, Punitive Adversarialism in Public Assistance. We've been speaking with the book's author, Spencer Headworth, who's also assistant professor of sociology at Purdue University. So great having you on today and really appreciate your time.
Thanks, David. It was a pleasure.
If you value what we do at The David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind-the-scenes videos, the Daily Bonus Show, the commercial-free Daily Show, as well as special discounts on merch, including hats, hoodies, mugs, and T-shirts. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. The trouble sort of is continuing for radical Republican Congressman Madison Cawthorn, except it's not really trouble if there are no consequences. And yet again, it seems that's going to be the case. If you're wondering what I'm talking about, I'll explain the entire thing to you. Madison Cawthorn brought a big knife to a school board meeting that took place at a school in North Carolina. This is against the law, okay? New York Magazine reporting. Last week, Madison Cawthorn, the MAGA congressman from North Carolina, attended a school board meeting in Henderson County where he spoke, of course, against mask requirements for students. While he was there, an attendee snapped a photo of what appeared to be a knife stored underneath his wheelchair. By the following day, it was circulating on social media And the school district notified authorities and publicly committed to cooperate with their investigation in the interest of the safety of our staff, students, and members of the public. Bringing a knife onto public school grounds is a Class 1 misdemeanor in North Carolina. But the Henderson County Sheriff's Office announced the congressman would not be charged. In a statement, the sheriff's office said that the decision took into account the full circumstances of the incident, by which I guess they mean a Republican congressman did it. Quote, although unacceptable, occasionally a person inadvertently possesses a knife. Politics being what it is, writes Olivia Nuzzi, Cawthorn's adversaries are not content to let the issue die with the ruling from the sheriff's office. On Sunday evening, American Muckrakers, a political action committee that opposes Cawthorn, sent a letter to Pelosi urging her to investigate the matter and take appropriate action. The letter includes further documentation about when and where Cawthorn carries the knife in the form of a photograph published in January. The image taken by Gabriella Demzuk on the morning of January 6th as Cawthorn made his way to speak to the crowd that would go on to storm the Capitol shows the congressman's fist raised in the air. The letter notes that in the photo below Cawthorn, there's an object bearing a knurled, rounded, metallic-colored end with a black face, a large hole, and an apparent screw head bearing a strong resemblance to the Microtech SBD dagger. The idea being that this guy is carrying knives around all the time. So remember that Madison Cawthorn also tried to bring a gun in his checked baggage through TSA security at an airport. Now, you might say, David, why are you saying tried? He said he didn't know it was there. Well, it was there. Not knowing the location of your firearm is a negligent act at best. And he did try to go through with it in his luggage. The idea of, well, he didn't know that it was there doesn't really change that. And it was just a big oopsie. No big deal. No charges. It's cool, everybody. Won't be charged for the gun at the airport. Won't be charged for the knife at school. So we're definitely seeing a little bit of a pattern here. And it is against the law in in North Carolina. It is unlawful to possess or carry, open or concealed, any Bowie knife, switchblade, dirk, dagger, or other pointed or sharp-edged instrument on school property. Am I most concerned with this, or is this just a symptom of the bigger issue? The bigger issue is this guy so acutely, so desperately, so obviously has no business being a lawmaker, period. He has nothing substantive or valuable to contribute about mask mandates. He went with the knife to the school board meeting just to say we shouldn't have mask mandates. He has nothing relevant to add about school policy or any policy whatsoever. And Cawthorn is really emblematic, an example of the worst of the Trumpian Republican Party, along with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and a few folks who have been around a little longer, Matt Gaetz, Louis Gohmert, who's been around even longer. And this is why I see the 2022 midterms as uniquely important as far as midterms are concerned. You know, we said the 2020 presidential election was likely one of, if not the most important presidential elections in a really long time. That was absolutely true. We don't typically say these are the most important midterms of our time. I am convinced that the 2022 midterms very well may set the direction of American politics into 24, 26, and 28 at minimum. And if these people get reelected, assuming they all run for reelection, Marjorie Taylor Greene apparently is. We looked at one of her ads yesterday. If Cawthorn runs for reelection, if Boebert, they may have already filed for reelection. I just haven't checked. You may know more about it than I do at this point. If they get reelected, it will be a real signal of the likely Trumpian direction of the Republican Party and thus much of the country for the foreseeable future. And, you know, gun in airport, knife at school, it's all very, very bad. But most importantly, Cawthorn is a guy who offers nothing in terms of policy. They don't even really hide it. I believe it was an aide to Madison Cawthorn a few months ago said, we're not really running a policy shop. We're running, I think they called it a communications office, meaning we're about social media and memes and images and bullet points were not about policy. And that's much of the Republican Party at this point in time. There's this continued rift that is taking place within right-wing media at this point in time. One element of this is that, once again, supposedly Fox News is refusing to air MyPillow ads for Mike Lindell's company, MyPillow. We've talked about some aspects of this before. MyPillow is a company owned by the right-winger Mike Lindell, who's been a guest on this program, that sells pillows and other elements of sleeping. And they used to advertise all the time on Fox News, would spend a ton of money advertising on Fox News and presumably get a pretty good return for it. That's why he kept doing it. And Fox News has now on multiple occasions supposedly refused to air his ads. In part, it is believed to be because of the connection between Mike Lindell and false claims about the 2020 election. There's a new article in Salon which says Mike Lindell is begging Fox News to start airing his ads again, but the network refuses. Lindell wants his ads back on Fox, but it appears the cable behemoth isn't ready to take him back quite yet. The MyPillow CEO angrily pulled his company's advertisements from Fox in July after it ignored the lead up to a South Dakota cyber symposium and declined to run an ad for the gathering. But after nearly 2 months away, the betting magnate appears to finally be ready to make up with the conservative network. Lindell laid out the situation, says he's been trying to air increasingly watered down versions of his ads, but that Fox News doesn't like it. Let's go to an interview with Mike Lindell. This guy really seems off his rocker, but if it is indeed true that Fox is refusing to air them, it could signal an interesting sort of line in the sand, even for Fox News as far as ads go. Let's listen.
Because I don't know what Swin's going to write. He's so far left you can't even see him, and he's so far left he takes a corner, and he'll even tell you that. But I like him though, because he's very, he'll read back to me at least what my quotes were. So here's the facts. Everybody, before the cyber symposium, I put out an ad on Fox telling people about frankspeech.com and
right.
The cyber symposium. I put that out to every station in the country. Fox News was the only one that denied that ad. That includes your CNNs, MSNBCs, ABCs, CBSs. Remember, I advertise everywhere with MyPillow, and this was an ad that was accepted for Frank, directing people to the to watch the cyber symposium.
You guys are following this, right?
That's all it was. So when Fox would not allow that, did not want to be part of this cancel culture I've had it with them. Shame on Fox. So I canceled all my pillow ads, right?
Now, that's interesting that a private company saying we don't want your business is cancel culture as far as MyPillow is concerned.
Then we put an ad up 2 weeks later, everybody, and after the cyber symposium, and that one said, hey, just go to Frank's Speech and you can see great shows and you can see if you missed the cyber symposium.
Well, that's not truth in advertising. There are not great shows on Frank's Speech. That would be a lie.
Fox was the only one in the country that denied that ad. Then this week, or it's early last week, I put another ad. I said nothing about the cyber symposium. I said, go to frankspeech.com. You can see great shows. We showed some of the shows, your Diamond and Silks, all the shows we...
Diamond and Silk are now on Frank's Speech. Can you imagine what is happening to this country?
Yeah, and you can get great products from MyPillow and my store. We did that, and...
By the way, do you guys hear what sound like whippets happening in the background?
Fox said that they didn't like the content of the ad. They didn't like us to say... the first two ads they said were about symposium. They didn't like the content of the ads. That's why they wouldn't take them, because it said symposium, right? Then this third ad, Fox said they didn't like the content over at Frank's Speech.
There's either a woodpecker or someone's huffing whippets.
Brandon, they didn't like your show.
They don't like what? Fox doesn't like my show?
I guess not. And but that's no. It gets worse, everybody. So they said,
How could it be
remember, they
worse?
said 1, they didn't like the content of the ad. 2, they didn't like the content of the ad. 3, they didn't like the content of the platform, the website, Frank's Speech, the stuff that was on frankspeech.com.
All right. What a victim, huh, guys? It's just horrible what's going on with MyPillow. What's interesting about this? The noise in the background is interesting, I will admit, but it's very interesting that there is now this entire wing of the right, the Diamond and Silk, MyPillow, etc., Newsmax, OAN wing. It's too radical for Fox News. Like, at the end of the day, Fox is right wing, but Fox wants to make money. They want to be in rather than out. And you even now have people who watch Newsmax saying Fox has become left wing, the MyPillow types, the January 6th types, and others. And Newsmax is now running an ad. I'll play it on a live stream. I don't think I'll talk about it on the podcast, but I'll play it on an upcoming live stream. Newsmax now has an ad where in the ad, it's audio of Trump saying, Fox is so-so, but Newsmax is doing really well at this point in time. So a very strange rift happening within right-wing media, but even Fox News saying some of this stuff is even too crazy for us. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. This is a really important topic. I got a caller who said, is there something about the news that is bad for one's health?
Hi, David. My name is Anna. Longtime viewer of the show. Wanted to bring some female representation to your voicemail questions. My question for you is, how do you protect your mental health while consuming so much just horrible media?
Yep.
Like, I feel like my mental health has suffered just from trying to follow the world's news and follow current events. And I can't imagine what it's like for somebody that, does this as their job. So I was wondering how you deal with that.
Yeah, many people ask me this. So there's two things that go on. One is, I'll admit it, you become sort of desensitized to it. I know when I'm talking to people not in this business, they will report to me or they will mention some story in the news. And I can tell I'm not having the visceral reaction they're having because I've been desensitized to a lot of this stuff. That's number one. But number two, you've got to schedule breaks. And when I'm done producing Friday's show, until I start getting ready for the Monday show, I'm not paying attention to any news unless there's like some weekend political event going on that I'm involved in streaming or whatever the case may be. And I'm just reading, not politics, reading history, science, whatever, fiction, and doing other things. And I think it's of incredible importance to do that. So the mere fact, Anna, that you're asking the question is a very, very good sign. We've got a great bonus show coming up for you today. Sign up at joinpacman.com to get instant access to the bonus show. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. CuriosityStream is the world's only streaming service dedicated to documentaries, featuring tons of amazing titles you won't find on any other streaming platforms. Get CuriosityStream for 25% off, which is just $15 a year, by clicking the link right underneath this video.